leadership and the transparency piece, you can't turn it on and off. It's either who you are or it isn't. And if you believe it's going to be the way you want to be remembered as an impactful leader, then consistency is everything.
So you say it's either who you are or it isn't. So if I'm a leader listening to this and I go, oh my gosh, I have not been a transparent leader, can I change?
Sure, but it requires commitment to change.
Say more. We are going to unpack the topic of transparency, what it is, what it isn't, mistakes leaders make, and what's the right amount of transparency when it comes to leading. Hi, my name is Jayson Krause. I'm the founder of Level 52 and the author of the book, The Science Behind Success, What Every Leader Needs to Know About Mindset, Influence, Culture, and Performance. To dive into this topic, I am joined by experienced leader, entrepreneur, business owner, and advisor to leaders, Mark Terrill. Mark, thanks for joining me on the Executive Commute.
My pleasure, Jayson. Nice to be here.
It's great to have you here, and I'm going to start right out of the gates. The topic is transparency. And the question I have for you is, what's something that you used to believe about transparency that ultimately is incomplete, naive, or false?
That's a great question. For me, I think it was, I became an early entrepreneur and shortly after that joined my first executive peer group. And I was a little overwhelmed by some of the people that were in that room. And I would show up and play my cards pretty close to the chest. And one of the members actually went to my advisor at a certain point, and he said, I think this guy can get there, but if he doesn't start to be more forthcoming, more forthright, how can we help him if he's not willing to be more transparent? And that was a difficult message for me to hear, because I thought I was actually showing up present, and I had to go away and think about that and realize that, yeah, I joined this peer group because I wanted to be a better leader. And how could they help me if I wasn't being transparent around everything, not just the good, but the less good?
Well, what is it? What are the stories that you made up in your mind that had you keep your cards close to your chest?
I think for me, I don't know if other early stage entrepreneurs feel this way, but I looked around that room and there were some pretty seasoned veterans. And there was an intimidation factor that I think caused me to hold back. And also back at my business, I was the president of a company with employees, and that was a brand new experience for me too. And how much should I share? And what were the downsides of being open and transparent, as opposed to thinking about what are the good things that happen if I'm open and transparent? So I think that's why I was reluctant in the beginning. And it's interesting to me as I move into later years as a business owner and then as an advisor to people, that seems to be the natural reaction. What if I reveal to my employees that we've just come off a bad quarter? What's the flight risk? Yeah. Instead of, how can we all come together, if I'm honest, open, and transparent with them, to make sure that Q2 is a lot better than Q1.
Well, in the stories you make up, if we go back to your first example, I'm in front of a group of people, business owners, leaders that are much more experienced. They've got it all figured out. I'm not going to be the jackass that opens the kimono and talks about all of these challenges that I might be experiencing.
Absolutely. However, they also modeled the behavior that I needed to get to. And when you sit in a room with someone who's 10, 15 years in, has the world by the tail, as it were, and then comes to a meeting like this and reveals, I don't know what to do. I'm stuck. And they look around the room, including me, as a young entrepreneur then, and say, what's your advice? That kind of scrambles your eggs a little.
What was the impact on you when you see a room of highly accomplished leaders already? Be vulnerable, be transparent, and then ask a younger leader like you what your perspective was.
I mean, that's a long time ago, Jason. I'll try to think back to those days. You know, the first question you ask yourself is, do I really have something to contribute here? But they're asking me. And I don't have the life's experiences that they have yet. My business might not even succeed, you know, because it was early days. So what do I have? But I had, as most early entrepreneurs do, endless energy, fear of failure. It's not an option, you know, all of those things. And I think young people bring to more mature business leaders that level of energy, that optimism, that belief that anything's possible. They haven't really seriously considered that they won't one day be just like that person. Mm-hmm. And so when I fast forward to today, when in a peer group, I love having bookends of the senior statesperson with the early stage entrepreneur, and then everything in between, because that stew, that blend of different levels of experience, you can always learn from someone.
When you and I met way before this, we talked about the podcast, and I asked you what the core theme you wanted to talk about, and you chose transparency. What had you choose transparency?
Well, it's a personal belief that I have, and people either share it or they don't, and that's that there are very few examples of when transparency is a bad thing. More times than not, being open, transparent. I mentioned to you that I see a bit of a blend between transparency and vulnerability. More times than not, if you want people in your organization to follow you and you're not open and transparent, then how do you build trust with your customers, your stakeholders? Unless you're a transactional business, which I never was. It was all relationship based. Openness, transparency, they just seem to me to make so much sense, and a willingness also to, I think you mentioned earlier, lift the kimono a little bit. I just believe in it so strongly, and the longer I spend on planet Earth, the more I see great leaders tend to be very transparent leaders. I had an experience years ago back in my insurance days, and we were at a retreat and offsite with the CEO of a British insurance company, publicly traded, and I was blown away by how much he was willing to share about the things that were both going well and not so well. And somebody asked him a question about transparency, and this still makes me smile to this day. He said, "I will be completely transparent with you unless I can't." And I guess that really came down to, you know, we are a public company, and things can't get said in a room at times like that. But otherwise, that's how he ran a company of 25,000 employees.
Well, it's interesting because when you think of the commitment to transparency, it's easy to think that, okay, well, that means full disclosure. Mm-hmm. But you can have transparency with very specific standards.
Yes, you can. Sure, you can. In fact, I think you have to. You know, even if you relate it to home. I don't have any secrets from my spouse. But there are things that happen inside a business room that not only does she not need to know, she shouldn't know because of confidentiality. So we can be fully transparent in the room with our peers, and the reason they're there is because they know that's what's said in that room stays in that room. So transparency can be situational. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, so we're gonna unpack transparency and vulnerability, but it might be helpful for us to understand part of your journey as a leader, so that we can answer the question: Why should listeners trust what you're about to tell us around transparency in leadership?
Well, it's funny when I meet a prospective member these days, 'cause we all have insecurities. And I know I'm about to meet a 30-something-year-old. And I wonder, are they gonna want an advisor with white hair and twice the number of years on the planet that they, and more times than not, their response is, I want somebody with life's experiences. So in an indirect way to answer your question, I've been so honored and privileged to have been associated with Executive Peer Group through tech since I was 32 years old.
As a member.
As a member. And in the last decade now as a chair. And so I've had the opportunity to experience the plus side of transparency as a member. I mean, it meant everything to me in time. And there was an expression that tech still uses to this day, which is a member joins a group because of the chair, which makes sense, the first point of contact. But they stay because of the members. Yeah. And the members in that group over time, and it's changed. I still remember the people that populated that group when I first joined it and those that are in it today. And I continue to be humbled by them. And they are already accomplished leaders, and they come to an executive peer group to become even better.
So for those, you've said the word tech a few times. For people who have never heard of tech, don't know what it is, how would you describe it?
Canada's best kept secret, perhaps. We just celebrated last fall our 40th year in Canada. We're associated through a global organization based out of San Diego called Vistage. And Vistage had its roots, I believe, back in the 1950s in Chicago. And there was a successful entrepreneur, CEO of a business who, on his own, started reaching out to leaders of other industries of similar size and put the first group together informally because he felt that the strength and power of decisions made collectively as opposed to walking the path alone made sense. And then it started to mushroom. And then Tech US was formed and was rebranded many years later as Vistage. And so Dr. Lynn Tanner brought it to Canada. It stands for the Executive Committee. Very confusing name as we moved into the 90s and the next century, where people hear tech and their first reaction is it's a technology play, and it's anything but. But I was invited to attend a breakfast that he hosted at the Glencoe Club. That's how BD was done back in those days. And I listened to his presentation. I heard the Q&A. I always sleep like a baby, but I didn't that night. I couldn't afford it, and I couldn't afford not to. And when you think back on the best and worst decisions you've made in your life, that was top 3 for sure in the best. Yeah.
So you joined tech, and you had an insurance business.
I did.
Yeah, tell us about that.
I was working for a small independent broker here in town, and he's still around. I need to call him. He called me into his office one day, and he said, "Mark, I'm going to move to Victoria, and I'm selling the brokerage." And I said, "Oh, thanks for letting me know." And I said, "Have you already sort of, have you got a buyer?" He said, "I think so." And I said, "That's great. Do I know him?" I said, "You know him really well." I was so stupid, even dumber then. And I think I probably had 2 more questions before the light kind of went on that I was that guy. And I said, "Bruce, I don't have any money. I can't buy your business." He said, "Oh, I thought about that." And at that time, there was an organization. It was associated with companies that still exist today, London Life, Royal Trust before TD had acquired them. And they had a hand in just about every kind of placement involving insurance except for one, and that was the independent broker. And they started this company called Trivest out of Toronto, and they made investments in 33 of us, I think, at the peak. And they were a minority shareholder, and they were your bank. And so they loaned me and my two partners essentially all the money. I think I put $10,000 into it and probably had to borrow that. And they became my partner both operationally. They provided lots of advice, and also when I started to mature the business and we began to make acquisitions, I had more access to capital than probably I should have at that point in time. And so we grew the business rapidly. And at a point in time in the late 90s, we merged with another brokerage that was quite a bit larger than our own. And I thought it was a succession plan for these people. And we were a cultural misfit. That was a lesson that both I learned as well as the CEO of the other business. And it did not go well. And so I think I was experiencing my own midlife crises at that point, and so I sold my interest in the business and started another little brokerage. I leased some space from another broker in the city. We didn't even have a name. We did business under his licenses, and we started to grow like a weed. And I got the call from this guy in Toronto. He's since passed away, but he was such a character. He'd been right-sized by one of the big global brokers, and he wanted to build a national, privately owned firm. And he said, "I've heard things about you." And so I flew to Toronto, met him. We did a deal. I don't recommend this, by the way, but we truly did a deal in like an hour. And it was all based on trust, which, again, maybe that's not how a lot of business people do business today, but I think it's a lost art. And we shook hands, and a month later we were partners, and he asked me to open the West up for him, which I did. And then he had a very serious health scare. Said, "Mark, my docs are telling me that the stress of running this business is too much, and you're from Ontario anyways. I'd like you to move back to Toronto and run the business for us." And by then we never got east of Montreal, but we were Montreal west to Vancouver, and we had some little satellite offices in the U.S. And I said, "I'm not moving back to Toronto. This is now my home." My son had been born by then, and I said, "But I'll commute and I'll run it on an interim basis for you, and we can eventually do a search." And he said, "Okay." And 16 years later, something like that.
16 years later, the search came to an end.
That's actually what happened. Yeah. He wanted to exit at that point, and he was our largest shareholder. And we reached into the private equity world, a little boutique firm in Toronto. And when they came in, that was within a few months. Nothing wrong with what they were doing. They were following the PE playbook, but that wasn't my playbook. And I was a build and hold guy. We could just as easily today have chosen to speak about corporate culture, which I think there's a gentleman that wrote a book before Donald Trump that said culture trumps strategy.
Culture eats strategy for breakfast, right?
For
Peter
yeah,
Drucker.
Yeah, that's right. And I believe that still to this day. And so, the PE firm was in place. I stuck around for a short little while to help with the transition. And I was in a meeting with my tech chair. Then he said, "What are you going to do next?" And I said, "I'm not sure. I don't want to be a road warrior anymore." I was too young to completely hang my skates up, but I also wasn't sure I wanted to be an operator any longer. And he said, why I asked you that question and where I think it can go. And I said, I think you do. And
You were a little quicker on that one than
I
the
was
first
way
time buying a
quicker on
business,
that
yeah.
one. Well, and in fact, I'd had a lot of seeds I planted along the way because
Okay.
it truly was what I wanted to do. And he was at an age and stage of his life where he said, I need to spend more time with my grandkids, and most of them live in the States, and so that's going to take me away. And we're on schedule for our meetings and what Tech calls one-on-ones. And he said, I can't have my cake and eat it too unless somebody replaces me, Mark. And that was a bit like the old days too, because I was working for the guy whose business I bought. I was in Lynn Tanner's group, and he said, I don't need to do a search. We just need the group to say that they'll accept you moving from one side of the proverbial table to the other.
Wow.
And so we went on retreat, and at a certain point in the 2 or 3 days we were together, he said, I've got a little bit of new business that I want to discuss with the group, and this is it. And Mark and I are going to go for a walk, and you guys have your own little version of an in-camera. And when we come back, you let us know if you think it's a good or a bad decision. And that's how that went.
In camera, what's that?
Well, an in-camera, as I technically would think of it, with a business that has a board of directors, at a certain point in time, the CEO gets invited to leave. And that's when the most candid conversations happen about, do we need to performance manage this person, or are we satisfied? Is there anything else we need to delve into? And really, at the end of the day, any peer group, I suspect, but for sure inside of tech, it's not my group. It's their group.
Yeah.
It's the members group. And so if you're going to be their once a month leader, you do that at their at their best wishes.
So we're going to talk about transparency.
Yeah.
And I like to start with a definition. Mm-hmm. How would you define transparency?
Well, transparency to me means open and honest. It means no hidden agendas. It means sharing your vision with the people that are going to help get you there. That would be internally with your customers and all other stakeholders. It's very, very similar. And and again, I'll come back to, I think I mentioned this earlier. If you're in a transactional business, maybe it doesn't matter as much. I'd have to think about that. But if you're in a relationship business where people matter, then anything less than transparency to me is dishonest. I don't know. Does that answer it for you?
Yeah. In preparation for this, I sourced a few definitions that I want to throw out there.
Okay.
And one is interesting because a lot of modern transparency in business has been influenced by Louis Brandeis.
Okay.
And it's based on the concept that sunlight is said to be the best disinfectant. And so that's sort of the metaphor for like putting everything out in the light to disinfect the things that, might be sinister, to bring out to the light, the things that need to be brought up. Now, the question is if that influences reform or the invitation to perform as a result of it. So we'll talk about the upside and the downside.
Okay.
But what's the opposite of transparency?
Well, the opposite of transparency for me, I'm not sure if I have a technical word for it, but it means withholding information. It means that you don't trust the people that are in your orbit. It means that you think you have all the answers. So what's the need to be open and transparent? I think it's it's someone with a closed mindset instead of a growth mindset. I guess that would be my response to that.
Yeah, it's like the the concept of camouflage, right? If transparency is helping to bring exposure, the things that matter most,
Yes.
then the opposite is really operating from a place of camouflage. How do we keep things hidden so that they aren't noticed? Therefore, not creating the difficult discussions, etc.
And and what I think those people fail to realize is that in the absence of transparency, people make up their own stories.
Yeah. Creates more debris, potential conflict.
Absolutely. And the stories that they make up are typically not very flattering ones.
When have you seen this happen?
Oh, I mean, I think we see it every day on the political front. When was the last time a media person asked a premier or a prime minister a question that they answered directly? They obfuscate and they talk around it, and because they're trained speakers, it almost sounds like they answered the question unless you go away and reflect on it a little, and then they wonder why
there's no trust.
Exactly.
How many times have you seen, I mean, politics is an easy one, where a direct question is asked, a specific answer could be given, but yet the answer just drifts so far from what the request was, creating what? Frustration?
Absolutely.
Disappointment,
Yes.
and a lack of trust.
Yes.
Aside from avoiding the realities of a question, when it comes to transparency, what do people confuse transparency with?
Weakness.
Say more.
They're operating from a bit of a fear-based mentality. And so even the example I gave a little while ago about we just had a bad quarter. And if you walk in still full of bravado, and you're not open with your team, they know what just happened. They maybe don't have the specifics. They maybe don't know that you missed your budget by 23%, but they know you missed it. And if you're still a wine and roses guy, then back to making up their own stories, the very thing that the leader believes that he or she is protecting, he's actually creating, and that's a flight risk. And I mean, there are so many other examples. If you want people to follow you into battle, as they say, don't you have to have the trust that comes from being transparent? Don't you have to, back to my point about vulnerability, why do leaders feel that it's a sign of weakness to admit that they don't have all the answers?
Why is it?
I mean, it's misplaced, and I know I'm constantly coming back to executive peer groups, but that is my world. And what I see when I'm talking to someone about becoming part of one of these groups, because they're by invitation, and we will delve into whether or not they're willing to come into a group like this and acknowledge that they don't have all the answers. And if it becomes clear in the conversation that they're not willing to be open, transparent, vulnerable with their peers, I will discourage them. I don't think tech or any other executive peer group will be for you.
Yeah.
And I believe very strongly in that. And I guess there's nothing essentially wrong with that. I mean, we all get to decide in leadership. There have been so many different mantras around, command and control, consensus leadership, so many.
Upper lip, like different ways of operating.
For sure. And it evolves. And so I'm sure that there are many, many successful businesses that have chosen a different path. But it seems to me that at the end of the day, you not only benefit as a business leader, you continue to grow and evolve as a person. And if you are willing and open to hear other people's perspectives and learn from them, where's the downside in that?
Well, even if you go with the metaphor that the sunlight as a disinfectant or the sunlight as a catalyst for growth. If we don't bring to surface these things that are challenging and be transparent and vulnerable, then how can those potential seeds grow? When ultimately, isn't that the entry point? When I come to you and say, hey, here's a problem I'm wrestling with, then together we can facilitate growth.
Yes. Yes. And I love your sunlight analogy. I mean,
it's not mine.
Well,
I just found it.
Fair enough. Todd Miller, who runs tech, always says, Mark, there's absolutely nothing wrong in shamelessly stealing other people's ideas. And and I share that. And, you know, it's beautiful sunny day in Calgary for the first time in a few days. Yeah. Tell me that isn't hopeful.
Yeah.
You walk outside and everything seems possible today that didn't when it was snowing the other day.
In what a great frame for transparency. It ultimately, transparency, when we bring to surface the things that are so easy to hide, then that's a place to be hopeful. That collectively we can unpack it and find resolution.
It sure is. It sure is.
What is it that breaks in leadership when transparency is missing?
Well, number one is trust. And then from trust, so many other things cascade. You know, do I belong here? Do I want to belong here? Eventually it leads into the culture of the organization. And, you know, when you're 21 or 22 years old and you're just looking for a job, perhaps, maybe you don't think about that. But the minute that your mind begins to shift into a career mindset, and you have lots of choice in countries like Canada, I don't have to be there if my leader isn't someone that I can get behind.
Yeah. When does transparency matter most?
During tough times.
Why is that?
Well, if ever they need to believe in you and see you be open and transparent. I mean, COVID was such a great example of this. And the best leaders, in my experience during COVID, were the ones that communicated over and over and over again with their teams. Because right then, they were selling hope. And if they didn't have credibility to go along with that, then it was just words. But if you had been an open and transparent leader up until then, and you became even more so, people were all bought in.
Transparency is selling hope.
I think it is. Yeah. Hope with credibility.
What makes it credible?
You know, there's that old expression, it takes forever to build a brand or a reputation. It only takes a minute to destroy it along the way. If you have been consistently open and transparent with your team, then you can sell hope because it's truly credible, because the authenticity that you've been bringing to your leadership role has been there all along anyway. And now we're going through a difficult time. We have some sort of crises brought on, you know, in our province. I think for a moment in time during COVID, the price of oil went negative.
The barrel costs more than the oil.
That's right.
Yeah.
A little hard to believe in April of 2026, but nonetheless. So if you worked for anybody involved in the oil and gas space, and you were young and impressionable, and you didn't believe in that leader, how does he or she sell you hope at that point in time?
As a leader, there's this concept called the illusion of transparency. There are studies made where people overestimate how much others can detect what they're feeling. And so I don't feel the need, maybe as a leader, to share because I assume that you know what's going on. When have you seen that or experienced it yourself where you implied people knew what was going on and therefore didn't feel like you had to share everything?
I think I've done it. Not with intentionality, but you know, you're so deep into everything involved in your organization as the president or CEO that I do think there are moments in time when your reality isn't necessarily theirs, but you feel like it must be.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, right? This is what we're into here. And also because leaders tend to be busiest people in the organization, especially if they have multiple locations and they're traveling a lot, one of the things they know they need to do but perhaps get a little lazy or complacent about is the communication piece. Are you still spending enough time in front of your team, being a leader, being transparent, being open, and you push it off? It's like, one-on-ones with your employees. You told them you were going to meet with them every quarter for the rest of the time they spend with the business, and you missed the first one.
Yeah.
What have you done? And so I think consistency over time, back to the brand and reputation, leadership, and the transparency piece, you can't turn it on and off. It's either who you are or it isn't. And if you believe that it's going to be the way you want to be remembered as a leader, as an impactful leader, then consistency is everything.
So you say it's either who you are or it isn't. So if I'm a leader listening to this and I go, oh my gosh, I have not been a transparent leader, can I change?
Sure. But it requires commitment to change. I mean, Malcolm Gladwell, one of his books, forgotten the title of it now, but 10,000 hours. And, if you want to make a fundamental shift in almost anything, whether it's athletics, academia, leadership, if it's really important to you, and you intend to change, then intentionality has to be accompanied by commitment every single day.
The quality reps of what does transparency look like
For sure.
to me as a leader?
Yeah, and you know what? If maybe you're making a shift inside a business, and your team is going to be a little suspicious of this new you, then one of the first ways you can bring some vulnerability back into that is to say, look, I'm not perfect. And I have come to the realization that transparency is really important around here. And I'm asking for a little bit of grace because I'm going to trip up periodically.
Yeah.
And my CFO or my ops manager or somebody that I'm really close to is going to call me out on that whenever it happens. I promise you that. And I will do better. But it's a work in progress.
Well, when you think about we're all works in progress, it comes down to our level of awareness around our blind spots and our commitment to address them. My question to you is, what's a point in your leadership where you doubted yourself the most? And how did you get through it?
Well, in the very beginning, back to when we bought the business, and I mean, Jayson, what I didn't know would have filled many books at that point in time, and I could sell, and that was my secret sauce. But I never operated a business. I'd never hired anybody, fired anybody, negotiated a contract, none of it. And we were less than a month into our new ownership when we lost our largest client. And Travis was based in Toronto. I'm sure those two guys, they're both still around. They likely won't watch this podcast, but in the event they do, John Garner and John Cartwright were the two guys. And I flew to Toronto and said, look, I'm, figuratively speaking, prepared to hand you back the keys to the store.
Because I can't drive this thing.
We're not going to get there. We were interest, and once a quarter we had to make principal payments. And I'll never forget the conversation. And they said, first of all, you aren't going to fail. We did a pretty deep dive on you before we decided to lend you the money to do this. We're patient, and if you need a holiday on either interest payments or principal payments, then we'll work with you. And I got on the plane and came home with the confidence that they had just placed in me. We never missed an interest payment. We never missed a principal payment, and we went on to flourish. But that was my first example, and that was pre-tech, where I realized
the transparency,
oh my God,
led to greater confidence.
Yes.
An understanding of the backing behind you.
Yes.
That helped elevate.
Absolutely.
So how did you lead differently once you got off that plane?
I wouldn't say that I had a swagger about me that I didn't have before I went down there, but I believe I started to come across as a more self-assured leader. I guess you never actually get to the end of your leadership journey, but I was clearly at the front end of it. That's for sure. And that little vote of confidence that allowed me to believe that I could become that leader. That's when I started to invest in what does that really mean. And it wasn't long after that I got invited to join a tech group. And the power of peers, and the support that they give you, the challenge that they give you. Now that we call it carefrontation. Care about me enough to challenge me.
Yeah.
And I've loved that ever since. I realized I'd found my tribe pretty quickly on.
And so you ended up leading a business with how many employees?
I think at our peak we were 350. So
that's not a small shop.
No, it's not a big one either, but it's and we were geographically dispersed. So lots of as much as, back to culture for a moment, as much as you want to have a uniform culture throughout your company, there are also regional differences that they're just there.
Yeah.
And so you need to know which hill you're prepared to die on, and where you can make accommodation as well.
When you talk about transparency, what's the first sign that somebody's lacking transparency? How do you spot it in the moment?
Are you talking to anywhere throughout the organization, or just within leadership?
If you're looking at leadership,
yeah,
right, which is the lens that we look through, you see a leader that's not operating with transparency. What's the first sign?
Well, inside a tech group, it's a lack of willingness to share financial data, and or bring something that's clearly been edited and redacted all over the place, and only share a little bit of that. And when questions are posed, they bounce around and struggle to make eye contact. So that would be a first one, I think.
Okay, so then imagine I'm in that tech group. I'm the one that's struggling to share financials. Mm-hmm. I have discomfort. How do you help me? Invite me into the process of transparency and the value.
Well, the first thing that would happen, you get a hall pass the first meeting that you don't do this, and so following that, I would schedule time with them in a one-to-one, and ask what's holding them back. Is there a reason that you're willing to share with me why you were less than transparent? And sometimes there is. I mentioned that I was intimidated. I lack confidence, and sometimes you just listen to some CEO present, and we had our best year ever, and we crested $300 million, and you're sitting there with your little $4 or $5 million, and so you kind of like,
and we're at a 20% drop.
Things like that. But that's an opportunity to remind them as to why they joined this group.
Yeah.
And how do they help you?
Yeah.
If you're not willing.
That's it. To say, hey, we're sitting at $5 million in revenue. Mr. or Mrs. person who has $300 million in revenue. What are you seeing that I'm not? How do I get to where you are? But you won't do it unless you.
That's right. Yeah.
So let's go to the flip side, advanced transparency. It's not just full disclosure, but what does advanced transparency look like in a trusted group of leaders?
Wow. That's a great question. It's a really great question. Maslow and his little hierarchy of needs, and you arrive at the top of the pyramid in a self-actualization role. I think advanced transparency is probably a continuum and a procession where you start to arrive at a place where even when you thought you were being open and transparent, you were still withholding something around fears. So maybe an example of that is a CEO who is approaching the sunset of his or her career. And the one thing they're really reluctant to talk about with anybody is what might that look like in terms of timing and relevance. If I go, the first couple of years I was doing this work as a chair, arguably the most successful CEO I have ever known at a personal level was in a process of selling the business. And every single one-to-one that we had during the time he moved into, it was more of a figurative chair role, but he was still around for a period of time. And he worried so much about, will I still be relevant when all of this is done? When I no longer can say I'm the CEO of a particular company.
Yeah. That loss of identity.
Yes, who am I? And I think maybe that's the answer to your question about fully evolved transparency, because here's somebody who has enjoyed enormous personal and professional success for 25, 30, 35 years, who is about to slide into home plate and call the career a day. And do they ever need the help of the people around them at that point? And are they willing to be open and transparent about their future fears?
The existential questions.
Yes.
That we carry as well.
Yeah. Will anyone care? Do I matter? Can I make an impact after I'm no longer running a business? They had a playbook. I used to say this to lots of people as I transitioned out of my old business. I knew what I was doing on Sunday night before I went to bed. I knew what I was doing. I was running a business.
Yeah.
And it was all going to start all over again on Monday morning. And it didn't really stop throughout the weekend either, because you're in the deep end of the pool all the time and there's no place you'd rather be than that. And then one day,
it goes away. Well, I think it's very similar as an athlete. Nothing is more clear.
Oh.
Every 4 years there's an Olympic Games. Yeah. Every year there's a World Championships.
Yes.
During the season, every week there's a specific race, and everything goes towards putting your effort and resources towards those staged milestones.
For sure.
Every day, you know what training looks like. You have a trainer.
Yeah.
And so to go from that routine to all of a sudden, who am I without this routine?
Yeah. And you might only be 30 years old at that point in the case of an athlete.
And then the risk is, whenever you engage with people, oftentimes the discussions are about who you were, what you did.
That's right.
Versus who you're becoming, what you're creating.
Sure.
You and I can talk about the benefits of transparency. You've got a lot of experience seeing the value of transparency through tech groups, your experience as a business leader yourself. What's the downside or the dark side of transparency?
Well, maybe this might not be where you're trying to take me. But if you have a banker involved in your world, you need to be honest with them for sure, because it's also built on trust. But there are countless stories of, if you breach a particular warranty in your financial arrangement with your banker, suddenly they view you very differently. And so if it's a little bit too early to start being open in that. Like, we're not in any trouble here. I'm happy to talk to my partners about this. I'm happy to be fully transparent with my team. But I really believe that we're going to make it through. I'm not going to call my banker up and say, we just had a really lousy quarter, and I thought you should know that. That might not be the smartest decision you ever made.
So you take that example with your team. The downside or the dark side of transparency can be that you miss the timing on your message. Rather than it be a catalyst for cohesion and collaboration and a builder of trust, it can become a chaotic message.
Yes, it can.
That creates fragmentation.
Yes, it can.
A lot of questions inside the business.
Sure.
So how do you get the timing right?
Well, there are built-in, baked-in opportunities to do this already. Is there a cadence around town hall meetings? Is there a cadence around your newsletter? Is there opportunity when you're in the office to do meet the pres for pizza and lunch? Those opportunities already exist anyway.
Or if they don't, I think it's a great thing for listeners to consider. What's the cadence where transparency is built in through some of these mechanisms and others?
Sure. And there's an old adage that you can never over communicate. Public speaking, you stand on stage and you say, this is what I'm going to tell you. And then you tell them, and then you remind them of what it's just, and it sounds like you're being, that you're not acknowledging people's intelligence, but that's not the case. Messages need to be sent continuously, and they need to be consistent. And yeah, if you're running a transparent business, you've already built all of these avenues for communication anyway.
Well, let me challenge that a little bit.
Okay.
Is because leaders ask us, what's the right amount of vulnerability, the right amount of transparency? And it comes down to the message that needs to be received versus wanting to just share and unload the things that I'm experiencing. They're very different things, right? Without them being saddled with intentionality, what's the impact I want to have? How do I want this to influence or inform the people inside the business versus just unloading things to the business? Because there can be a cavalier way of being transparent.
Yes,
that can have a very negative impact.
Yeah, there can. And your place as a leader is not to vent with your team. You're demonstrating leadership, and so it's not a venting example. It's sharing of information so that collectively and together we can lead ourselves to a better outcome. I'm reading the book right now on Shackleton was the
expedition.
Yeah, and it's kind of come back into vogue. I mean, it was written in the 50s, but it's fascinating because it was all built from the diaries, and he made some mistakes on this journey,
as we do,
as we do. He also, though, for everything else, he was really open with the team about how they were going to manage their way through this and come out alive in the other end. And so it wasn't a venting, but he shared information that needed to be shared, and he did it really well. And they followed him when you could have imagined all kinds of scenarios when they would have abandoned him.
Yeah. So that's a great segue to true or false. I'm going to throw a few true or false.
Okay.
Your way.
This should be fun.
There's no sitting on the fence.
Yeah.
You choose true or false and then back it up. Tell me why.
Incidentally, I do and check in a tech group. They're asked to rate themselves business, personal, and health on a scale of 1 to 10. And I always tell them 7's not acceptable.
Yeah.
Yeah, they hate that.
Okay, so in this case, no, it depends. You choose true or false. Here's the first one. True or false? The more information, the better.
True.
Back it up.
Absence of information, people make up their own stories. then they're not going to be good.
Okay. Here's the challenge. There's something called the transparency paradox, is that you can flood me with information and it can create more chaos than it can trust. So this is one of the lines that leaders, when it comes to transparency, is what's the information that matters most to my audience? How do I be transparent? And you even say with the Shackleton example, how do I provide the right information at the right time and let transparency be an opportunity for collaboration?
So you might hate this, but it's an art more than it is a science. And so at a certain point in time, and in the beginning it's harder, but as you mature into a leadership role, there are times you have to trust your gut. What do they need to know? What is it important that I tell them? And that doesn't mean you're withholding. It just means I need people to be laser focused on the message that I'm about to send. And if I overwhelm them with a bunch of stuff that might be nice to know but not necessary to know, then guess what? We're going to get chaos and calamitous results because we didn't provide them with focus.
Focus is a key word. True or false? Total transparency can be harmful.
Yes, in very rare situations. And I'll go back to the COVID example. Communication was critical. But if a leader had been 100% transparent when they didn't know where the world was going, they might have created more fear inside their organization. And so at that moment in time, they were cheerleaders. They were purveyors of hope. They were in certain circumstances, I believe they were selling a message that in their heart of hearts they weren't sure they believed it themselves. But that's a rarity in my experience.
Here's an interesting example. I was working for a firm based in the U.S. and I was observing an all hands meeting. Mm-hmm. And the executive team had just went up to the group. It was about 300 people in the organization. And they got up there and they said, our business is about to triple. And the executive team was excited. It was a big rah opportunity, but yet the audience was stoic. And it was an interesting observation. And afterwards, I asked someone, I said, hey, here's what I noticed. What was going on? They're like, yeah, we're quite overworked right now. So if everyone was like me, they didn't see this as something exciting. They saw this as something, an even bigger reason to steal my evenings and weekends.
Yes.
So it's where transparency as a mechanism, but without understanding your audience, what's the impact? How do we generate dialogue as a result of this information can have an unintended negative consequence.
Sure.
So it's like this, what's the art, as you say, it's not a science, what's the art for leaders to get transparency right?
Well, to play a little bit on the example you just gave, because I think every leader has experienced a little bit of this where their team is already pretty stretched. One of the things I used to share with them is it's not that I'm not looking to expand the size of the team to meet the challenge, but at the same time recognize this, and it's consistent with who we are as an organization. If I'm going to seduce Jayson to leave his organization and come to mine, then I need to set him up for success, because if we don't really have a place for him, if this 300% or tripling of our organization doesn't start the traction and I brought him in, guess what? Last one in, first one out. I've done him a disservice. And so I would want them to understand that. And the other thing, and this is human nature in general, whether they ask themselves this consciously or it's just in the back of their mind, it's what's in it for me? Yeah. And so good for them. They're them being the C-suite, they're going to triple the organization. Well, if they do, how does that make my life better?
Yeah.
And so part of that message needs to be that. And, sales organizations have done this forever, the thermometer on the wall and all of the rest of it. And if we achieve this, we're all going to Hawaii. And because really what they're saying is there's something in this for you too.
Well, to me, when I hear that, it's one thing to be transparent, but without it being tethered to empathy, understanding how this is going to be received with my audience, then that's when you risk the transparency being cavalier or misinformed. How do you connect it with the intentionality of what's the impact I want to have on the audience as a result of sharing this?
Well, can I keep coming back to the tripling of the organization's size? You connect with them by showing them, demonstrating to them that this is a journey that they want to be on as much as you. And again, if you've established over time that you're a leader that leads with authenticity, then they'll believe that message. And they won't just say, he's stealing my weekends.
Yeah.
Young associates in law firms, I'm not a lawyer, so maybe it's an urban myth, but I don't think so. They work those people to the bone. But there is a reward for them at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And if they were dedicated to practicing law, one day they'll be a partner in that firm.
Well, you go back to 10,000 hours. It's accelerating the reps so that they can be high performing.
True, it is. Yeah.
But when it comes to law or when it comes to high performing environments, there's fascinating research done in UK that high transparency in environments can actually create less honesty. Where if I know,
tell me more.
if I know if my drafts are being put out into the organization and there's a lot of criticism, people may withhold their thinking. And that transparency is something that is revered and celebrated. But it can also be something that, in the absence of a great container, has people be less willing to showcase their work for risk of being targeted, criticized, because they know that everything's going to be seen by everyone. And the risk of toxic people coming in means that I've got a big target on my back. So if you think about this, if you're a business leader and you go, I want an environment of transparency, but yet research shows that it could lead to people being less honest, therefore less expressive, less creative in their work. How do I create the conditions where transparency is an elevator and not a detractor of what we're trying to achieve here?
So every business has a culture. And you either have a culture of intentionality or you have the one that happens by default. So I've not seen the study you're referring to, but if you don't have a zero tolerance around toxicity and backstabbing in your organization, then shame on you as the leader of the business. And to decide not to be transparent because you're tolerating toxicity in your business, how does that movie end?
You allow the undesirable mutations start to take a good ideal or concept and turn it into something bad.
Yeah. It
comes back to intentionality, but I really want to underscore what you said. You allow things to happen. If you make transparency a part of your culture and don't back it up,
absolutely,
then of course it'll turn into something.
Yes, it will.
We take any concept. There's a path of effectiveness and there's the path of, the undesirable mutation. It comes down to one thing. What am I allowing to happen here?
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to transparency, what advice sounds good, but it's actually damaging?
I think you might have touched on this about 10 or 15 minutes ago. Is it a venting process or is it a transparency that links directly to what a high performance team does and accomplishes every day? So, recognize when, it's a Friday afternoon, you've had a tough week, and you decide to explode. I'm going to share. I'm going to tell everybody just how horrible it's been and how disappointed I am with them and all of the rest of it. Oh, and by the way, have a nice weekend. That is not going to go down well. And so I think, again, back to art versus science, you need to be intentional. You need to be thoughtful. That old expression about we have two ears and one mouth, even in a leadership role, be thoughtful before you speak.
What's the question I should have asked about transparency but haven't?
Have I ever seen a transparent leader fail?
Have you?
Yes. But not because they were transparent. That's one ingredient in the secret sauce, and there are many others that come to play. And so many examples of your industry is shifting right before your eyes, and you didn't move quickly enough. That doesn't mean you weren't a transparent leader. It just means that you didn't get out in front of it. I mean, This has happened to global organizations, not just small independent regional firms. So yes, a transparent leader can fail. A company can fail for all kinds of reasons. But you skew the odds, in my opinion, if you're a transparent leader in the right direction.
What's one thing behind success that you've seen in business that most leaders never learn to see?
I think maybe it's the speed to pivot. So, that old expression, what got you here won't get you there. You've got a legacy business. It's done nothing but succeed for you over time. And then this thing called Netflix comes along, and never in a day is it going to be successful until it was, and you didn't move quickly enough. Blockbuster, all those Kodak,
classic examples.
Yeah, on and on and on. And I think I heard the other day from an economist. I was privileged to hear him speak, and he said the war in Iran, in his opinion, has done more to shock the world into the development of renewables than the climate activists have done for the last 20 or 25 years. And I thought, isn't that interesting? The more I reflect on it, the more I think he's right. And the longer that strait stays closed, the more the Chinese and the Indians who rely on it so heavily are going to say, if we don't develop an alternative form of energy, then shame on us. And that's at a nation level. But if you happen to be an energy company in one of those countries, then this is either a tremendous opportunity or it's the death knell to your company. And that comes down to leadership.
We dove into many aspects of transparency. If there's one thing that stands out that a listener needs to walk away with, what is it?
Well, if you happen to share my views on this, then faced with the choice of being a transparent leader or one who plays his cards close to the vest, who doesn't share with his team, as you reflect on the conversation that we've just had, don't you think there are way more compelling reasons to be a transparent leader than the opposite? And it just seems, to me, it's so self-evident. You asked me a while ago, as a leader, do you sometimes forget to be open and transparent with your team because you just assume that everyone else is already drinking from the same fire hose as you are? And that may not be the case. So go out of your way to make sure that you're all at the same water fountain.
So, as listeners, your job is to take something that stood out from this discussion and experiment. Put it into the laboratory, because that's why we're here, to invite you into the laboratory of your leadership. And the laboratory this time was around transparency. Mark, thank you for coming in and joining me on the Executive Commute.
It was my pleasure. Thanks, Jason.